right? Thank you. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to our Silicon Global Ask a VC series, 65 episodes and counting. And today we are going to be welcoming Jenny Xiao from Leonis Capital in San Francisco. And Jenny is a superstar AI researcher who has worked at OpenAI. She has worked at Oxford, doing research at Oxford, doing research at the University of Chicago, doing research at Columbia University, and she's known as a researcher VC. So we're going to be diving into why that is the case. And I think this is a very appropriate time to ask these questions because of the AI funding boom that we've all been seeing with Anthropic and OpenAI and the startups valuations. It's just an incredible boom. So we're going to be talking about whether this is a hype or not. And I'd love to get Jenny's perspective from a research standpoint as well. She has actually been very actively involved with Leonis Capital, which is on the second fund at 25 million. It has invested in numerous companies and has a research-driven approach to investing in AI. So we'll get to hear a little bit more about that. Today, we're going to be discussing some of these issues, and I'd like to ask you to warm up your questions for later in the show. I'll be doing a fireside chat with Jenny first, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A, in which case you can then open your audio and your video and ask Jenny a direct question. But these are some of the questions that Jenny and I thought were the most pertinent. And so let's just start with that. Jenny, given the huge rounds of venture capital going into Anthropic and to OpenAI, these valuations at the $80 billion range, have we ever seen anything like this before?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, Rebecca. I think in the field of AI, definitely not, but in the field of venture, definitely yes. There's always been like booms and busts in the venture hype cycle, and AI right now is just, like the crown jewel of venture capital. Everyone wants to invest in AI companies. All the AI companies, the hot ones at least, are getting super high valuations. But I do want to point out there's this really interesting graphic that our fund organized from last year, showing how much of the $14 billion that was invested in AI in 2023, how much of that was going into the top three companies, which was basically like OpenAI, Anthropic, and I forgot the third one, but basically the top like two or three companies was taking 90% of the $14 billion investments from last year. And we're seeing this trend continue going forward in this year, where a lot of the bigger deals are taking a huge chunk of the capital, whereas like the downstream deals, the smaller deals, are not getting that much capital. So in AI, you're definitely seeing the C stage companies are saying, oh, we're having a hard time raising, the valuations aren't super high. But then you have superstar companies that are raising like $1 billion valuation at a Series A, sometimes at a seed round. So it really depends. I think that valuation high for AI definitely that's the case for like super hot companies, and it's more so the case for companies that are Series A and beyond than for C stage companies. And a large part of that is because venture capital wants to get into AI, and a lot of the bigger name funds are able to write checks in Series A companies and beyond, but are not able to write smaller 1,500,000 checks at the C stage. And that's where you see relatively reasonable valuations. But anything beyond that, it's super high.
I see. Well, it is interesting how the tech giants are monopolizing this sector so far. You've got Google, Microsoft, and Amazon all in there in a big way. So are they going to be the ones who continue to dominate in this sector?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think you can tackle this from like very many different perspectives, but I think from one way of looking at this is the relationship between startups and the bigger companies. A lot of the startups raise the majority of their funding from big tech giants and not from venture capital. I think that's a very unique trend that we're seeing in the Gen AI wave, because very rarely in a tech period do we see big tech investing more than venture venture capitalists, because people usually rely on venture capital, sometimes growth stage investors, as the main source of funding. But for AI, if you look at OpenAI, you look at Anthropic, those are like some really, really deep pockets, big tech companies investing in them. I think in a way, these companies are like increasing the valuations of these AI companies. So for example, a lot of these companies are not investing with cash, but they're investing with cloud credits. And
Right.
you can mark the price of your cloud credits however you want. It's not pure cash. So you're making like a 70% margin off of that. And that just artificially inflates the price of startup valuation, which goes back to the first question. But on the other hand, it also shows how much value big tech companies can capture from the Gen AI wave, especially from the infrastructure perspective, because building infrastructure takes a lot of time. Building like cloud computing, chips, building, like the computing infrastructure, all of that takes a lot of time. And that's not something that startups are able to capture. That's where like the Googles of the world, the Amazons of the world, and the NVIDIAs of the world are able to capture value. One of the predictions that our fund made is that 80% of the gains from Gen AI is going to it's going to go to big tech companies, whether in the form of successful investments in startups or in the
Right.
form of selling compute credits or selling chips.
I see. Okay. Well, then I think we have to ask the question, is this boom going to continue through this year and into next year?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think people always have a tendency to overestimate how impactful technology is in the short term and overestimate how underestimate how impactful the technology is over the long run. I forgot what the name of the fallacy is, but there's definitely a term for it. And when the Gen AI boom just started in the late 2022, I was, just leaving OpenAI. I was, looking at these models firsthand, and I know what the limitations of these models are. And I was reading a lot of the articles produced by VCs or by some founders, and I'm like, wow, you guys are so like, greatly exaggerating what these AI models are capable of doing. And the picture that you're painting is the picture for like 10 years down the line, or at least like 3 to 5 years down the line, and definitely not something that can be accomplished in 2022, 23, or even 24. So I think there definitely is a cool down effect in Gen AI this year, and I've been seeing this, since late last year. I think the top of the Gen AI hype is summer of 2023. And now we're already seeing investors being a lot more cautious about investing in Gen AI companies, asking harder questions around moats, around business models, and just being a lot more rational in their investments. But I think in the longer run, Gen AI or AI more generally is going to create a lot of value, and is going to create like a societal transformative effect.
Yeah, I've seen estimates of 1.3 trillion in market
Yeah.
value by 2020, by 2032. Amazing, with a 43% growth annually over the next few years. So how is Gen AI going to change things so much? Because right now we still have some ways to go with perfection of AI, advanced AI, but not even speaking of Gen AI. Where's this going?
Yeah, it's really interesting because if you look at the economic impact of AI, I think we should really look at it not from like a individual product perspective or from the technology's perspective, but look at like the types of jobs the technology can replace or can enhance. You're looking at white collar jobs that could potentially be replaced by Gen AI or could potentially be enhanced by Gen AI, and that means the cost of, say, legal fees is going to go down, consulting fees is going to go down, and like companies are going to need fewer bankers, fewer lawyers, fewer consultants, fewer financial analysts, business researchers, and all of that work can be replaced by AI, and that's going to create a lot of economic value.
Okay, so it's still got a long ways to go before perfection. So will it ever be perfect?
I think it's hard to like, call anything perfect. I don't think anything in the world is perfect. So, but I do think the AI will soon become on par with humans, if not better than humans. If it's coming, if you're talking about like artificial general intelligence or even artificial
Mhm.
super intelligence, I
Right.
think that's something, that's going to happen in the next 10 years. And ultimately, that's the bet that I'm making with Leonis Capital. Like we really believe that that's going to be the future.
Okay, that's very interesting. So then what market is leading this AI and generative AI boom right now? Is it primarily Silicon Valley, but maybe a little bit China, maybe a little bit France? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think Gen AI definitely is a global market. There are Gen AI startups like across the world, China, US, France, Germany, UK. Recently went to this event organized by a Norwegian government and
Mhm.
saw a lot of like really great Norwegian AI companies. But I do think the center of the Gen AI boom really is Silicon Valley and specifically San
Okay.
Francisco. That's where like most of the founders live. That's where most of the innovation is happening. American models are just way, way better than like whatever other countries are producing. And the American ecosystem around Silicon Valley is just a lot more advanced than whatever other countries have. But that doesn't mean that other countries don't have like, a couple of very strong players. Like France has Mistral,
Mhm.
and the UK has DeepMind, China has Heijen. And like most countries who are developed in the tech sector have their own AI unicorns and have their strong AI players. So it's really a global phenomenon.
Right. So it is interesting, though. Microsoft is based in Seattle, Amazon is based in Seattle, and those are two of the bigger investors in Gen AI. Not any Silicon Valley company. Google is in Silicon Valley. So it is kind of interesting that, yeah, some of this is coming from Microsoft and Amazon, which are based in Seattle. But I guess their AI engineers are in Silicon Valley. They have the secret sauce of how to code or whatever to get these large language models to work right. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between the different stacks in AI, right? If you look at the AI stack, we have like the application layer companies. These are like the perplexities of the world, or
Okay.
like I don't know, like AI powered search engines, AI powered dating apps. That's the application layer. Then you have the developer tool layer. These are like Hugging Face,
Okay.
LangChain, whatever. That's like the developer tool layer, and then you have the foundation layer models like
Okay.
OpenAI, Anthropic, and below that you have cloud computing providers like Amazon AWS or Microsoft and the Google Cloud, and then you have NVIDIA, right? So you have like different layers of the
Yeah.
Gen AI landscape, and I think the fact that like the cloud computing folks, Microsoft and AWS, are based in Seattle, doesn't affect their ability to like really invest in Silicon Valley because they're building, very different but very complementary products. But if you were to say to start a pure AI research lab and you wanted to be based in Seattle, then you might have a little bit of an issue in hiring and collaborating with your team because most of the AI researchers you live in Silicon Valley. But of course, we're in, the post-pandemic world. A lot of people work remotely, so that also makes
Mm,
collaboration a lot easier
sure.
across different regional centers.
Sure. What kind of salaries can these AI experts command?
Oh my God, like I have some ex-colleagues from OpenAI who are like pulling in $1 million, $2 million a year, and they're like, "Oh, I feel so poor," and I'm like, shut up, shut up. And most people, average AI researchers and engineers are pulling in like 300K, 400K. And yeah, like I've helped some of my friends negotiate their salaries, and I'm like, wow, I'm surprised how much you guys make as AI researchers.
Wow. So this is contributing to our inflationary economy, particularly in Silicon Valley, where
You know,
I shop
yeah,
sometimes
I
at
think,
Molly Stones and the prices have risen quadrupled, over the past couple.
yeah, I live in Rincon Hill. I don't know if you've, been to that area in San Francisco. There's this like supermarket called the Woodlands Market, and
Yep,
everything there is like super inflated, right? You buy an apple and it's like $5, or you buy like a banana and it's like, $10, right? And
right.
then I was joking with my partner the other time that, this is where VC money is going, which is like to these like super expensive supermarkets in downtown San Francisco.
Right, exactly. I paid $2 for an onion the other day and I said, and then the clerk said, well, it's a big onion. So I had to acknowledge that. But anyhow, maybe that was the last time, $2 for an onion. Okay, well, let's talk about China a little bit too, because you have some China experience and you have some viewpoints on China and the US and AI. So can you share some of your thoughts on where China is, what the future is for China in AI and generative AI?
Yeah, no, that's a super cool topic. It's something that I'm very passionate about, because I have family in China. I speak Chinese and I, visit my family in China like every once in a while. And
Uh-huh.
ever since like Gen AI became a boom, every time I go back to China for Chinese New Year or for like, I don't know, Mid-Autumn Festival, I get 20, 30 founders cold reach out to me and they're like, "Oh, I heard you're in China. Do you want to meet up? I have this startup to pitch to you." And I'm like, "Well, I can't really invest in China because of all sorts of restrictions." But
Hmm.
what's really interesting is that China is trying hard to catch up in the Gen AI space, but the technology is about at least 2 to 3 years behind the US. The only reason why a lot of Chinese startups are able to survive is because they have access to the cutting edge open source models from the West. We're talking about like the Llama 2s,
Right.
Llama 3s in the West. They're not able to develop their own AI models. I think that's one
Mhm.
big challenge they're facing. The other big challenge is, of course, regulatory. A lot of them like face censorship by the Chinese government, and that's like terrible if you're building especially a consumer app in AI. And there really is no enterprise market in China. So that's another
Oh, no
really big
enterprise
challenge.
market. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
there's like a very small enterprise market in China. It's very tiny.
I see. I see. Well, there are quite a few differences there. So it is kind of surprising where China was racing ahead or in parallel with the US on many of these new technologies. But in Gen AI, Silicon Valley has definitely distanced itself. Silicon Valley has definitely distanced itself. Are you there,
Yeah,
Jenny? Yeah, okay.
I definitely agree. I think Silicon Valley is the heart of the Gen AI boom. It is definitely the center of Gen AI innovation, and it's so far ahead of everyone else in this sector.
Okay. What do you think about Baidu's prospects in this area?
I think actually I'm pretty pessimistic about Baidu, partly because Baidu has been like quite slow to adapt to the last couple of waves of technological innovation.
Uh-huh.
In the last like cloud wave, like Baidu was slow to the game, and even like today, Baidu is pretty slow to the game in AI as well. A lot of Chinese investors who are real experts in the Chinese AI scene are more bullish about ByteDance's future in AI just because they have a lot more data, especially international
Mhm.
data and multilingual
Mhm.
data than Baidu. And they're also
Mhm.
putting a lot of resources in hiring AI researchers and even like outside of China. I don't know if you've seen any of the ads on LinkedIn. I get bombarded by those all the time. They're hiring AI researchers at ByteDance's Silicon Valley headquarters, and they're giving out like super competitive salaries on par with Google and like, sometimes like yeah, other AI companies in the Bay Area as well.
Yeah, so OpenAI is in a race now for most valuable startup in the world with ByteDance. ByteDance has been number one for a few years now, so maybe OpenAI will supplant them.
Yeah, it's really quite interesting because when I first started getting involved with OpenAI, I know a lot of friends of mine who are early employees at OpenAI, and they joined OpenAI when it was when it was like a nonprofit, and they weren't getting paid very much. Their salaries was like a third of what they would get paid if they worked for Google or
Right.
DeepMind, but they, were willingly taking a salary cut to work for OpenAI because they were idealistic. Whereas like nowadays, it's like, well, OpenAI offers the highest salary and they're really quite bad in like kind of the race to the top in terms of offering high salaries for machine learning researchers, and a lot of AI companies feel like they can't win the salary arms race against OpenAI. So times really have changed.
Right, right. So look, a lot of the discussion about Gen AI and advanced AI and all this field is about the safety and the security issues. And I know you have a research focus on where this is going. So this research focus that you have must give you a lot of insights into the safety and security risk. Maybe you could share some points about that.
Yeah, I actually got into AI very early. Like I got into AI back in, 2015, 2016,
Mhm.
in large part because I read a book by Nick Bostrom, called
Okay.
Superintelligence. And it was like, a book about how advanced AI might be a threat to humanity. And that's how I got into AI. And I was very fascinated about it by AI, but also kind of scared about the future of AI, which is why I decided to like, go down the path of learning about this industry and being involved in this industry. And I think AI definitely needs guardrails. I'm not, even though like most Silicon Valley VCs prefer a world where there's like very little regulation and there's free market, companies compete. I think that's the official stance of A16Z and a bunch of other VCs, maybe Khosla Ventures. But I do believe that Silicon Valley needs to work with DC to work out ways to regulate AI and to keep AI safe. I think that's a very hard, that's easy to, it's an easy thing to say, but like that's a very hard thing to implement given that these two parts of the US don't really talk to each other. And there's a lot of economic incentives for companies to push back against regulations.
Right. And so today you can't really tell what's real and what's not real. Like if who went to the Met gala the other night, the costume gala in New York City, you can't tell who was real and who was not real. There were these fake characters. Are we going to solve this issue?
I don't know. There's a lot of ways where you can maybe like label data or like, label photos, use AI to do that. I think we've actually invested in quite a few companies that are doing Gen AI security and safety. One of the companies that we invested in called Redcoat, they just announced their seed round.
Mhm.
And what they do is they use AI models to prevent AI powered social engineering attacks. The social engineering attacks is basically if you have your video online, people can clone your voice and they can clone your face. And maybe they'll, call one of your friends and say, hey, Rebecca needs like $500. Can you wire me $500 right now? And that's a form of social engineering attack. So the company that we invested in, Redcoat, what they do is they use AI to detect social engineering attacks. And this is extremely important because you cannot imagine like how many like people in the US are being targeted by these social engineering attacks. And this is very, 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 like detrimental, especially for people who have no idea how AI works and they haven't even heard of fake voices or like fake images.
Right. Yeah. We're just thinking that everybody has the same level of insights into this new technology, but they may not. And that's a good point. I think it's something very relevant to bring up. And that's also very worrisome as well. Because what happens if people start believing in something that, on a mass scale?
Yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons why, if you look at when AI models are released, by these like large companies like Google or DeepMind or OpenAI,
Mhm.
Anthropic, you'll notice a pattern, which is they try to avoid election season, for releasing models, because one of their main concerns is, people who have malicious intent using AI models to create deep fakes, and they don't want to be liable for a case like that. So that's why they all refrain from releasing models like during an election season or during a time of political turmoil or political tensions. And that's why a lot of people are saying, oh, OpenAI is going to release like GPT-5 later this year. And I'm
Yeah,
like, I'm not sure. If they do, probably like it's going to be over the summer, like, September at the latest. They definitely won't want to release anything close to the election date.
yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you about ChatGPT 5 when that was going to come, and what do you think it was actually maybe this year or next year or when?
Yeah,
So
I think I can't say like whether it's going to be like this year or next year. It's definitely like OpenAI definitely is working on this, but it's hard to say like when they're going to release it because oftentimes they need to do a lot of safety testing. And I think whenever they release it, they're going to avoid sensitive periods in the election cycle.
sure, okay. I'm very interested in your research background, and maybe you could talk about how your research focus influences what you invest in and what kind of deals you've done, because you've actually researched them and spent like 80% of your time on that particular deal or that particular category. Tell us a little bit about your research orientation and how that makes you different.
Yeah, I always say that there's like two different ways of running a fund. There's the extroverted way of running a fund, which is you go to all the events, you try to get to know everyone, you get people to recommend deals to you, and you just like try to be buddy buddies with everyone, right? And then there's the introverted way of running a fund, which is, you really try to understand the industry, do your homework, try to understand who the main players are, try to understand where the technical innovations are, and then identify companies before they become hot, identify like trends before it becomes obvious. And that's the approach that we take. We oftentimes will do both commercial research and market research, as well as like technical research. So the technical research helps us a lot in identifying what trends are viable, like what is doable, basically from a technical perspective. And last year, we're very interested in the AI agent architecture. So like agent-based software, that's a theme that we're very interested in. And we were also very interested in the idea of AI video generation because we saw the technology as like moving very, very quickly. And we actually did a lot of research in that area. Like even before Sora came out, we were paying a lot of attention to AI video generation. So
Mhm.
that's like an example of like, the technical side of the research, like pointing us into the like different directions of like, okay, this is like technically viable and that's not technically viable. And also the technical research helps us identify like which areas are basically too early to invest in or like too immature, or the technology really isn't there. And I think that's probably like, us refraining from going into AI video generation like 2 years ago. Because a lot of people were saying, oh, well, after text, maybe we'll have like AI video. And at the time we were like, well, 2022, this is too early to look at AI video generation companies. And that's like, how the tech side like informs where we look at, and the market research helps us understand where the gaps are and what are some products people are willing to pay for, and what are products people are not willing to pay for. Just like we talk to a lot of corporates, a lot of enterprises, a lot of startup founders. We also like, do a lot of market mapping research, and that helps us understand where the market is going and where the gaps in the market are. So for example, one of the companies that we recently invested in is a video editing software company called Yarn. And that company is based on both our technical research as well as our market research. On the technical side, we saw like products like Sora coming out, and we were like, okay, this is a good opportunity for a startup to come up with a new way of generating videos and like editing videos, but also we did the calculation on like how much it'll cost for a company to train a model from scratch. And we quickly concluded that it doesn't really make sense from an economics perspective for companies to want to train their own models. It makes a lot more sense for companies to say, hey, I'm going to use someone else's model and not train their own model. On the business side, we were looking at the video editing and video generation workflows. And basically, those workflows have not changed for 20 years. And we were like, okay, in the age of AI, we think there's an opportunity for a company to come out with a totally different workflow for video editing that really democratizes video editing. Because if you think about it, nowadays a lot of people take selfies. A lot of people, even if they're not professional photo editors, they can like edit their own photos. But not a lot of non-professional people can edit their own videos in a very like, yeah, like I'm sure you've edited videos and it's always like a pain to do that.
Absolutely. So if you've got a solution for that, let me sign on to Yarn tomorrow when I edit this video and get ready to post it on YouTube. Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about some of your deals that you've done recently. You've got a slew of portfolio companies now in Gen AI and AI. Tell us about them.
Yeah, so Yarn is an example. That's like the first company out of our second fund. Another company that we invested in last year, this is December of last year, is a company called Meticulate AI, and this is a company that helps finance professionals do research on like market analysis, competitive analysis, product comparisons, and they have like a large number of features right now. And when we invested in that company, we were their first investor, like before they've taken any money from anyone else. We just like showed up and
Oh,
wrote them
okay.
a check.
Yeah.
And I've tried a lot of products in this area because I'm a research-driven investor. So I do a lot of research. I do a lot of market mapping. I used to do these like market mapping by hand, very manually, and I tried maybe like 10 different products. And theirs is the only product that works very consistently for me every single time. I can like, even with a fund, a very niche fund like ours, like I can go on Meticulous and say, hey, give me some competitors of Leonis Capital, and it'll give you a very detailed market map of AI focused VC funds investing in the early stage. So it's like really quite good, and I'm very impressed by the founders and the product they've built. And yeah, again, this is a company that really fits our thesis of investing in like trends that we believe in, and this is an AI agent powered company.
And this is for the enterprise market, or is it for consumer market, or both?
I think there's a prosumer version. So of course, like consumers won't go on, like a website and like, look at market maps, right? So you have to be a prosumer, have to be a financial professional to really want to do that.
I see.
But yeah, like there's like a prosumer version, and they're also looking to have an enterprise version where a company can buy a number of seats for its employees.
I see. So where is Gen AI going? Is that more of an enterprise play or a consumer play?
I think it's an enterprise play. And one argument that I like to make is when a new technology comes out, people always focus on the tech side, but later turn to focus on the business side because no one likes to talk about enterprise software. It's not sexy. It's been around for like 20, 30 years. When people think about enterprise software, they think about Microsoft or Salesforce. It's just not new and shiny, right? People like to talk about character AI or chat GPT or Mid-Journey, these like really new and shiny consumer companies that are easy to understand. It showcases the essence of the technology. But when it comes to like business models and also the ability to generate revenue, enterprise companies in the US are much better businesses than consumer companies because for consumer-based companies, they have very high churn, and they're always like, they always need to attract more consumers. Consumers are not very willing to pay, especially in this economic environment, whereas enterprises are much more reliable as customers, and they know exactly what they need. The tricky part of being a consumer company is that consumers won't tell you what they want. You need to guess what they want, and oftentimes the things that they say they want are not the things that they actually want. So I don't know. I think for AI, at least for startups, I think the bigger opportunities are in the enterprise space.
Well, how much are consumers willing to pay for enterprise? I mean, for Gen AI apps that work for them? $20 a month? What's kind of the benchmark you're seeing?
Honestly, I don't know. I just like to full transparency, I haven't paid for any of these apps. I got into a debate with one of my friends who was an investor in Perplexity, and he was making a case that Perplexity is going to go full enterprise or like full prosumer version. And he's like, oh yeah, we're not, Perplexity is not going to have any ads. Perplexity is basically going to charge you $30 a month to use it for the pro version. And I was like, well, so who's going to pay for Perplexity? And he's like, well, most Perplexity users will pay for Perplexity because they're wealthy enough. And he's like, and I'm like, okay, well, you're telling me that I'm poor because I'm not paying for Perplexity. I'm not paying for like any of the other consumer AI apps. Um, because I think the basic, the free version for me is already good enough.
Okay, so what tools do you use to keep ahead on this subject that's moving so quickly?
Yeah, I'm a very heavy user of Perplexity. I use ChatGPT a lot. I occasionally would use like the other chatbots, but like it's mostly these two. And
I
also
s-
sometimes I'll like make API calls. I create these little workflows on my own, and then I'll like use AI to like query the web, which is a fun little exercise, but it often does not work as well as Perplexity.
okay, you use AI
Like query
to
the
query the
web,
web,
maybe,
to query
yeah,
the web. I
yeah.
see, I see.
Yeah, or like,
Okay,
create a couple of like tasks for it to break down. But as Perplexity gets better and better, and as ChatGPT gets better, like it's
right.
harder to compete with my homemade apps.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. So I think we do have a couple of questions here. So let's see. Who do we have that has a question? Um, and if you want to ask your question, that would be great. Okay, well, here's a question that came in over the chat, and I will just read it out. And it says, are your investments exclusive to AI? Any interest in SaaS investing? So I think I think I know the answer, but let's get the answer from you.
Yeah, I think we invest in a lot of AI SaaS companies. So I think AI and SaaS are not mutually exclusive. But I think the question is probably like, do we invest in SaaS outside of AI? And the
Okay,
answer is yes, because 80% of our fund is going to go into AI, and then 20% is going to go into everything else. And that 20% is much more opportunistic. And we might have a company, a founder that we really like, but they're not using AI very extensively, but we'll also make an investment in them.
okay. Frank Yu says that he has a question. Frank, do you want to go on video and ask your question, or you want to just type it into the chat? Frank? Asked to unmute. Okay, there you go. And Hal Kelman also has a question. Oh, the questions are lining up. Frank, you're first.
Hi, thank you very much. That was great input. I have a question because I'm also in an AI agent company, but where do you see the agent space moving? Because in some ways it's a little bit more uncontrollable, more than the large frontier model world. And also, since the frontier models are getting more and more powerful every few weeks, how can any company or any startup actually keep up and not be sort of like made obsolete within 6 months as a new model gets released?
Yeah, I think on the second question, one of the biggest mistakes that I see startups make is that they try to build a product that makes up for the deficiencies of the current AI models. And that's a terrible field to get into. And examples of that are companies that are trying to build memory extensions. I don't know if you still remember that from like a year ago. Companies are like, oh, GPT-4 has a small memory, therefore I'm building like memory for GPT-4. Or like, like, there's a lot of hallucination in these models. I'm building hallucination control mechanisms for AI models. Those are like bad businesses to be in because you're essentially racing against time. You're making a bet that the models will perpetually be as bad as they are today instead of like looking towards the future. I think the
Okay.
opportunity for startups really isn't to make up for what foundation models aren't able to do today, but really look at the future and see what opportunities there are in the future and what what like white space there is in the market, right? What are consumer needs? And just start from there instead of starting from like, oh, well, ChatGPT can't do this, therefore let me do this instead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we're waiting for the world of a 1 million token context, so that'll be kind of interesting. Thank you.
Right.
I think like the latest version of the Google Gemini model already has like 1 million tokens in context. So, you know, maybe 10 million or 100 million is the next milestone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Good. So there is a chat question, and it is, we'll just read it out. Based on your market research, what industries and sectors offer startup founders the latest growth opportunities?
I think there's basically like we invest in like three different areas in the AI landscape. One is the application layer. So these are the companies that are building in like, you know, AI powered CRMs or AI powered you know, enterprise SaaS product video editing. That's the application layer. Then there's the verticals, so AI for healthcare, for legal, for like fintech, whatever. And then you have like the developer tool areas. We think these are the three areas that offer the best opportunities for startup founders to grow their businesses really quickly and in a very capital efficient way. And in contrast, we think there's a couple of areas that are going to be hard to build in. One is AI for consumer apps. And to this day, I haven't really seen a single great AI consumer app company, right? Like they're either like prosumer, like I would put Perplexity in more of the prosumer you know, category, and like ChatGPT also in the prosumer category, but like they are facing a lot of issues around willingness to pay because not that many people are willing to pay for ChatGPT or Perplexity. And then like the pure consumer based companies like Midjourney or maybe like character AI, they also have like big issues around churn. And a lot of these companies are deciding to focus on their core users. So Midjourney, these are the designers instead of the hobbyists. So I think because AI isn't really changing how humans function, it's going to be hard to create an enduring company that's a consumer-based company off of AI. And I think a good you know, like I think a good quote from Sam Altman is that people are interested in AI for like, you know, maybe an hour or two, or maybe like 2 or 3 days, right? But fundamentally, people are interested in other people. And right now, the emergence of AI hasn't changed the fundamental reality that people are interested in other people and interested in like other human experiences. And that's why it's not going to create the consumer wave in the same way that social networks created like a big wave in consumer behavior change, or like the mobile internet created a big wave in consumer behavior. And a large part is that it created new ways for humans to interact with each other because humans don't want to interact with AIs, basically.
Very good points. I like that very much. So I'm going to ask Ben to unmute, and I'm going to ask him to ask his question.
I first of all, I think you guys should have is this recorded? It's really wonderful. I would love to see a recording played or like a link sent to us. I'd like to
Absolutely. You should check out our YouTube channel, Silicon Global Online. We have
yeah,
numerous videos on there, and
right, great.
Jenny's
That
will be up there very soon.
wonderful. So I guess my question is Sam Altman himself mentioned that, you know, ChatGPT 4 is kind of like a not really smart, like a dumb, not even close to AGI. I think I know what he really meant. But I wanted to ask you, Jenny, what would you think where the smartness of AGI should come from? You know, how would you categorize a ChatGPT 5 or 6 or whatever would be smart enough? Can you describe from a research perspective the kind of parameters that would evaluate whether a future version of ChatGPT or something else would be considered really smart or intelligent? Thanks.
I think so first off, responding to like Sam Altman's comment that ChatGPT 4, like ChatGPT 3.5 isn't smart enough, there's definitely a reason that he's saying that, right? Like because he wants to fundraise, he wants to raise more money, he wants to convince people there's more to come, and he wants to convince people that the scale and law will continue. The more money and resources people put into OpenAI, the better models it's going to turn out. And you know, that's the agenda. I think if you look at GPT-4 from the perspective of OpenAI 5 years ago, people would say, wow, this is this is AGI. This is like even artificial super intelligence in many ways, because it is much more intelligent than what, you know, humans were able to produce like back in 2015, back in 2019, 2020. So it really depends on what you mean by AGI. I think in a lot of ways, GPT-4 is already artificial general intelligence because it demonstrates a lot of generalist capabilities. I would actually say the frontier, the hardest part to solve for AI is not the reasoning part. It's not the you know, like software side, the thinking side. I think it's actually the hardware side. It's like, how do you bring AI into the physical world? Because as a general intelligence, you're not just like processing language information or visual information. You're also processing a lot of information with like motion, with like physics, and that's something that AI currently is totally incapable of doing. And even Sora gets physics wrong all the time. And I think that is really the frontier, and that's going to be the biggest challenge for building like a truly generalist AI model.
Well, what about that Pen AI device?
Humane.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you used it. I've had friends who bought it and they returned it and they were like, "Oh, this is the worst thing that I've ever like seen or whatever." But I think that's a little bit harsh. I think, you know, maybe you want to give it a little bit more time. Personally, I just like don't really see a use case for the Humane Pen because if the whole goal is to replace your phone, it doesn't really like totally replace your phone. It has like no apps. It doesn't have an app store. It doesn't have an ecosystem. It's very, very, very hard to adopt something like that.
Okay. All right. So those are Google people who
I
designed
think
that, right?
it's Apple people, but
Oh,
I
it's
think
Apple
Harold
people.
has had a question for a long
Yeah.
time, and we've been like
Yeah.
skipping
Yeah.
over
Let's get
him.
to Hal Kelman here. Hal, go ahead.
Thank you. So in 2017, Google had a famous paper called Attention is All You Need. There are 8 authors to that. All 8 authors left. Do you have any comment about how that has hurt Google, or where these people went? They have went to 5 different companies. Do you know any of the 5 companies, or have any comment about that?
Yeah, I think some of them like went out and started Cohere AI. Some of them went out to start like Adapt AI. I think 1 or 2 people like went to Anthropic. I forgot like where the other people you know went, but they're like at various different AI startups. And I totally agree. I think, you know, Google has this big talent issue, which is why Google hasn't been able to really take the lead in AI development. That's been large part because of the internal culture, because of management, because of like, you know, yeah, like people just like don't like working for Google because it moves so slowly. I have
Right,
friends
that's
who are on.
the same thing that happened with Park. You know, they spent billions of dollars in a whole decade, and Park never had anything that made money, but they had 14 spinouts, and the best one was Adobe.
Yeah, no, that's the same issue. I think as companies grow bigger, like there will be certain forces that prevent the company from becoming more efficient. And as a VC, that's like what we're betting on, right? We're betting on big companies growing bigger and then like, you know, they're becoming slower as they get bigger. And people get frustrated. The most ambitious people don't want to take it anymore. They want to like break out of these companies and start their own startups. But one caveat I want to mention here is that I think some of the companies that broke out from the Google Transformer paper aren't great AI companies, or they're at least like struggling a little bit in the current AI landscape. I think Cohere and Adept are good examples of very technical, very, you know, great academic, you know, founders, but they just really struggle on a commercialization front. And oftentimes when friends are asking me, oh, what do I think about Adapt or Cohere, like other AI companies started by the academic researcher types, I always say they're missing someone like Sam Altman, a guy who can, or a girl, like who can like really take the technology and commercialize it. And also like, you know, do fundraising, do hiring, and just have the business skills in addition to like the technical, you know, having a technical co-founder.
Thank you.
Very good point. Ben, you have a question, right? Ben has another
Yeah,
question.
I do.
Okay,
I
go
wanted
ahead.
to ask. Yeah, I wanted to ask Jenny. So the big players, whether it's Google or Microsoft, they're playing a big role, as you mentioned, in AI. do you have any concerns that it might influence the deployment of AI to the somewhat of a bias of what these big companies, their sort of business goals are in terms of the way they would set the algorithm, the way they would actually deploy the AI to influence whether it's ads or purchasing or even worse, elections, for God's sake. But anyway, that's a bit of a joke. But if you can opine based on your experience, this trend of doing AI takes so much money, chips, electricity, et cetera, are there any possibilities where small players could get a word edgewise and to make impact on the direction of AI without having the basically dedicated sort of giving this whole space to the big players with money and data and access to the consumers? Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a very interesting question. This actually is a question that I've been thinking about for a really long time, like ever since like 2016, 2015. And I remember maybe like 3, 4 years ago when Web3 was like the hot new thing and people are always talking about Web3. And the whole theme is like how power is going to be trickling down from these big tech players into like smaller, decentralized actors. And at that time, I was a little bit skeptical of that argument because just from a technical perspective, it takes a lot of resources to develop the best technology, and that means power is in some ways always going to be concentrated in the hands of the few rather than in the hands of the many. So definitely in the age of AI, we're seeing like a reconcentration of power from like decentralized smaller actors into the hands of tech giants, and even the companies that are very active in the open source space, and they have started as open source ideals, have transitioned into closed source companies. And have taken on investments from like tech giants. Great examples include OpenAI and also Mistral. Like Mistral started as an open source company and now its CEO is saying, well, we can't do this open source thing forever. It's really expensive. And by the way, we're taking a huge investment from Microsoft. So I definitely worry about a world where these big tech companies have too much concentration of power, but in a way, like the open source movement also puts a lot of power in the hands of individuals, because you can go online, download a model on your computer and just like run it on your computer and use that model. But as individual developers, can you really develop a good product? Like, as someone who can code and like make products, I can just go online and download Llama 2 or Llama 3, but like, am I really going to create like a search engine as good as Google or like as good as Perplexity? Probably not. So that's why there's always going to be some concentration of power. But I think the way that smaller communities can really have an influence is by taking those kinds of initiatives, by trying to like build new open source projects and challenging existing players. And that also encourages existing players to contribute to the open source community.
Right. So what's the next big research area that you want to delve into?
I think one thing that I've been really interested in is the emergence of small models, because a lot of people are talking about large models, large language models, video models. Models have always become like bigger and bigger and bigger, but I think a large trend we're going to see in the next few years is actually models becoming smaller and able to run on your edge devices, so on your computer, on your phone, and this is how you really get personalized AI, and AI can actually understand you. Just imagine a product with just see a product similar to ChatGPT, right? Think about a product like that. ChatGPT doesn't really remember who you are. ChatGPT doesn't really remember like I don't know, like who your friends are, who your parents are, who your kids are. But imagine a product that has the information that Apple has. It runs on your phone, it understands who you are, it has like very granular, detailed information about you as a person. That could be very convenient. It could also be very creepy. I think as consumers, we're used to giving up our data to these big tech companies, but having a model run on our edge devices is the best way to keep our data private and not send over to the big tech companies.
Okay, good point. Reading today about a new bill in Washington, D.C. that wants to restrict AI investments into China. Just wondering what you think about that. Should
Yeah,
they,
yeah,
should there be two separate universes, China and US for AI, generative AI?
I
Or can
think,
they?
I think should is that's a normative question. I think there could be an argument arguing like yes there should or no there shouldn't, because if you have like one single system, that means you have to accommodate the other side, and the US for sure will not accommodate China's censorship and authoritarian tactics. And again, like China's not going to accommodate like, the values that the Americans hold, right? So it's very hard to accommodate, and in that sense, like maybe having like two separate systems is the best way to go. And then there's a question of like, well, will that happen? I think absolutely will happen. Ever since like 2016, 2017, we are seeing a huge trend towards like the US and China diverging in terms of tech standards and in terms of the tech landscape. I think China is really one of the few countries where you like go there and like none of your Silicon Valley apps work, like nothing works, and you just have to download an entirely different set of apps. And that's really fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It is. It continues to be fascinating. Ben, you have one quick question you want to get in before we wrap up?
Oh, thank you. I forgot to put down my hand. Yeah, I was going to ask Jenny about this open versus closed. The debate between Clinton and Jan LeCun. She might have already mentioned that a little bit, but I was just curious, Jenny, if you have any thoughts to follow up, how would you advocate for this model of having an open source platform of AI versus a closed? And then if you can expand to a bit of a for profit, not for profit, if you can, or if you're willing to entertain that type of questions, I really, really appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, I think would I want to have an open source model? For sure, I would, because open source models are always going to be safer than closed source models. Of course, like, the big argument for closed source models is that, oh, we have the, technology and like we can control the end use cases. But the case for open source is that you have many more, you have like many, many more eyes looking at the software, and that usually makes the software a lot safer. And that's why Linux computers are a lot safer than other operating systems, because it is open source. And I think it's the same for AI models. But the question of like, can you have a company that's purely open source? I think that's very questionable. I listened to a podcast by Jan LeCun, and he's really talking about how Meta is always going to be open source and how there's a business model to be built on top of open source. And I like, at the end of it, I wasn't really convinced that they're able to pull that off, because he didn't really illustrate a very viable business model for open source companies. I think, the only type of company that might benefit from open source is the cloud computing companies. Like maybe Microsoft one day or Amazon one day will say, hey, we're going to give you the models for free, but you're going to use our cloud computing platforms anyways. So there might be an incentive for them to do that, but other than that, I really don't see the business model working. So I think it's always going to be a hybrid of like nonprofit, for-profit, open source, closed source, or otherwise, like just from a business like model perspective, it's not going to work. And I think that's a lesson that OpenAI learned the hard way, because nowadays we look at OpenAI and we're like, wow, this company is raising at like a $90 billion valuation. But like there was a time back in 2017, 2018 when OpenAI was really struggling to fundraise when it was a nonprofit, and no one remembers it today.
Yeah, interesting, very interesting. Okay, wow, this has been great. Everyone learned so much, and we're so pleased that you're able to join us today, Jenny. Yeah, so let's give Jenny a round of applause, everyone. And let's stay tuned for our next show coming up in 2 weeks with Silverton Partners from Austin, Texas, another hot area. And that's going to be Morgan Flagger from Silverton Partners. And in New York City, if you're in New York City, you could join us for our book talk event talking about supply chain issues, China and US, the name of a new book called How the World Ran Out of Everything. It's written by a New York Times global economics correspondent. He's going to be on stage with me at Rockefeller Center on June 14th. So hopefully all of you can join us for that. And you can always join our Silicon Dragon Circle and come to all of our events. So look, I'd like to thank everyone for your attention and for your excellent questions, and for Jenny for her excellent answers.
All right,
And we'll
thanks for having me.
All right,
you,
any
guys.
any final comments, Jenny? Before we
Yeah,
wrap
no,
up?
really enjoyed it. This has been great. We'll love to come back again if you're hosting
Okay.
another show.
Absolutely. Let's do that, because we only scrape the surface in this case. All right, you take care. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye for now.